What's up everybody, I'm NoLucksGiven, and today I wanted to take a look at my anti-meta Master League team for Season 2 of the Pokemon Go Battle League. Now I don't typically make videos on the Master League every season because it isn't around for as long. This season it's also competing with the Premier Cup, but I had a pretty sweet anti-meta team that I wanted to show off in this video. I'm going to be showcasing some battles at the end of the video after I talk about the team for a little bit. This is also the team that I'm going to be running in the Master League portion of the Game Press Go Battle League Gauntlet. If you're not already familiar with the Game Press Go Battle League Gauntlet, do yourself a favor and check that out. We've got a lot of really sweet battles and a lot of fun battles between some pretty fierce competition, so those videos are a lot of fun. But back to this team, or back to this video rather, it's still the same team, but back to this video. This team focuses on 3 core principles, one for each of its Pokemon, and I think all 3 of the Pokemon in this team contribute towards making it pretty strong. The first principle is that Palkia is a pretty good leading Pokemon. Basically, Palkia has a lot of the same good matchups that Dialga has. I'm talking Kyogre, Giratina, but the thing that Palkia has going for it is it also flips those matchups, some of those matchups that are there specifically to handle Dialga. So Palkia, most notably, is really good against Groudon. So that's the first thing. That's why we are leading with Palkia. I think it is just really good right now. The second thing is Mewtwo is a great safe switch. By this I mean that if Palkia is not able to catch a good lead, if Palkia catches a bad lead, switching into Mewtwo is rarely punishable by your opponent's teams. Part of the reason I am playing this team is because I just got a lucky shiny hundo Mewtwo, so I went ahead and maxed that out and Elite TM'd it so that it has Psystrike and Shadow Ball on it, but I wanted to make a Master League team that utilized Mewtwo, and I think this team showcases Mewtwo as a safe swap really strongly. The third principle with this team that we are going to touch on is basically the fact that Melmetal is the #1 counter to the #1 played Pokemon in the Master League. Melmetal is really good against Dialga, and just finding the space to line up your opponent's Dialga against your Melmetal can just win you some games. Melmetal has some really strong matchups against some other things in the field. It's just a really good Pokemon, and once our Palkia gets rid of their Groudon, then Melmetal is typically free to do some work. So there's the 3 principles that we're going to be working with, and there's the 3 Pokemon as well that are on this anti-meta team. So I'm going to go ahead and showcase some battles that kind of showcase these principles in order as well. So first off, we've got our Palkia up against a Giratina lead, and Dialga would be good against a Giratina, but same thing here, our Palkia is going to be good against this Giratina as well. So they bait with an Ominous Wind, I don't shield, and then they switch to Dialga. And this is something that you see pretty often in the Master League. If they are unable to get a good lead, their safe switch option is going to be Dialga, so we really want Melmetal on this team to punish that. That's kind of our third principle here, as Melmetal is just super powering down this Dialga, and now we've got a pretty sizable advantage on our opponent because we still have switch advantage, and now we have a shield advantage as well, as their Giratina shields that. So we're going to go back into Palkia. Obviously, our opponent probably has a Shadow Ball for us pretty soon. We're going to go for an Aqua Tail though, and then they're probably going to Shadow Ball us. At this point, they actually do bait with Ominous Wind. However, our Dragon Breath does get to deal a lot of damage. I'm going to go for another Aqua Tail on my opponent's Giratina, and we actually take it out just like that. So then we are Mewtwo against a random Pokemon. It happens to be a Metagross in this case, but it doesn't really matter what it is because we're Mewtwo and we are up a shield against a random Pokemon. So I take their Meteor Meteor Mash, and then I just finish them off with a Shadow Ball, plus a few Psycho Cuts there at the end. But Mewtwo with a shield, I didn't even use the shield, I knew I would survive that Meteor Mash and be able to Shadow Ball the Metagross down, but yeah, just to show off the power of Mewtwo there. In this game, the same thing is going to happen. But yeah, if you can ever get yourself into a position where you've got Mewtwo and you've got more shields than your opponent, then you are definitely going to come out ahead. So I bait with a Rock Slide in this game here to start things off, just because sometimes you'll play Melmetal against a Dialga. They will just build energy forever. So in this case, I just didn't want to waste a bunch of my energy. I then decide to go for some superpowers. I am going to shield this Iron Head here in the middle. Like I said, my opponent built up a bunch of energy as well. I now have the energy to double superpower at the end here, so they are going to shield, and we'll get their last shield with our first superpower or our second superpower. Then we basically take out their Dialga. We will bring in Palkia and we'll Dragon Breath it down. That's why I said basically take out their Dialga. So again, we are in like a pretty good spot here. I'm going to go ahead and shield this Mewtwo though. And then when my opponent switches back into their Giratina, I am going to be able to just Draco Meteor this, and then I can switch to Mewtwo. That is just to reset the debuff on my Palkia from using Draco Meteor. Their Mewtwo would have beaten me to a Shadow Ball, but I would have been able to throw out a Psystrike and then gone back into Palkia and finished their Mewtwo off. Here is a really good lead, obviously. This would be trouble for Dialga, but for Palkia, no trouble at all. So they have to shield these Aqua Jets because they are doubly super effective. They're just going to stay in here. They're going to throw out a Rock Wrecker, so we're going to go ahead and shield that, and then they will switch to Dialga, and now same thing. We just switch on over to the Melmetal. We're building up a bunch of energy here, and eventually, when I get in these energy stalemates, I just throw a Rock Slide just to not totally waste all of my energy. Typically, your opponent's not going to shield that one because it's a pretty obvious Rock Slide, but it's fine because now my opponent is dead to one superpower, so we can actually take this Iron Head, and then we can double superpower our opposing Dialga from here, and yeah, that just takes it down. Then they bring in Rhyperior, and I couldn't quite get the superpower off, but I am able to bring back in Palkia and Aqua Tail the Rhyperior, claim their last shield, and then I actually am able to build up to another Aqua Tail and take the Rhyperior out. Then we go into Mewtwo, and I think my opponent will concede. Yeah, we're Mewtwo with a shield, so nothing is beating us from that position there. Pretty good, straightforward stuff here for the most part. Here's another pretty obvious winning lead, so our opponent is going to, again, switch out into Dialga. These battles are a little bit repetitive, but I think they drive the point home. A lot of players are going to be safe switching into Dialga, so when you have such a good lead that is able to cover so much of the meta, and then you have Dialga's #1 counter, Principles 1 and 3 there, or Pokemon 1 and 3, however, which way you want to look at it, we're able to get some pretty sizable leads against our opponents here. I'm just going to let the Groudon take me out. I think that Melmetal has done its job, and then that lets me get back into Dialga. Or Palkia, rather. I might call Palkia Dialga a few times in this video, just so used to when you're playing Master League that it's Dialga League more than it is Master League. But now our Palkia is Aqua-tailing this Groudon, and we are doing pretty good. We're up in shields. We're going to be able to take this Groudon down here now, and then we see our opponent's Kyogre, and they don't even need to see anything more. Kyogre was their last Pokemon. That is another Pokemon that Palkia is really good against, and there you see why my opponent had to switch into Dialga, as this Kyogre switches into a Dialga here, but Kyogre is also not going to be good at all against Palkia. So this guy will also switch into Dialga, and then we'll go into Melmetal. Same thing, just throw out a Rock Slide, doesn't get shielded. It's not a big deal. Now they are in range for one superpower. So we actually just go ahead and take the Draco Meteor. if we can't win the matchup, it's important to get ahead in shields, and we don't want to be shielding when they are not shielding, and then like their next Pokemon comes in and then we're down in shields or something like that. So we're just going to let Kyogre farm me down. Then we go back into Palkia, and Kyogre is really, really not good against Palkia, like at all. If they build up to a Thunder, yeah, they can hit us for a decent amount of damage. But we're doubly resisting the Kyogre's fast attacks here. So we're still able to take this Kyogre down and then fire off an Aqua Tail at the next Pokemon that comes in, and that's with taking a huge Thunder. At this point, I would love to just Aqua Tail that Rhyperior, but I don't want to let them just farm up on me. And Mewtwo with a shield advantage, that's all I need to see. So I switch into Mewtwo and just fire off some Psystrikes, and they are actually just going to try to rock throw me down here, or maybe this is Smackdown, either which way. They're just going to try to fast move me down because I have those two shields, but Mewtwo's going to get to a third Psystrike and be able to finish off the battle there. I think we've got 1 or 2 more games where I'm going to showcase Palkia as a good lead. Yeah, here's another Kyogre game. So I actually have 2 more after this, I believe. So once again, my opponent's going to switch over to Dialga. Pretty straightforward stuff, and again, it is a little bit repetitive, but that's why I'm just running the battles here and talking over them and discussing what can happen. So my opponent throws a Draco Meteor. That's totally fine. They are now debuffed, and that means that they are not going to be shielding these superpowers. So we just throw out a double superpower, and then we will probably see them bring back in their Kyogre. Oh no, they're actually going to bring in their Giratina. So that means both of my opponent's 2 Pokemon, again, are weak against Palkia. So when I go into Palkia now, I definitely want to shield anything from Giratina because I don't really have to worry about shielding things from Kyogre. They switch into Kyogre and fire off a Surf, which is definitely an interesting play. From here, I'm just going to switch into Mewtwo though because I don't really, if I can avoid it, want to line up Mewtwo against Giratina. So we take down the Kyogre. Now the Giratina and the Mewtwo are going to battle, and I'm just going to let the Kyogre go down, or the Mewtwo go down, rather. I will be able to actually get off a Psystrike, which is going to be enough to claim one of my opponent's shields, and then I will get to bring my Palkia back in, and my Palkia has so much energy at this point, just because it's really just dealing damage with its Dragon Breath, but it has so much damage that I can fire off an Aqua Tail and then immediately fire off a Draco Meteor and take out my opponent's Giratina. Again, though, you see, my opponent, when I had Palkia on my team, my opponent didn't have a choice other than to switch into Dialga or switch into just like a different losing matchup. This time we are up against a Groudon, and this guy's going to go ahead and switch into Kyogre. So this is basically like a situation that we were looking at before. My opponent's got 2 Pokemon that are bad against Palkia on their team. So they switch into Kyogre, and the reason that I switch into Melmetal here is because Melmetal will line up poorly against their Groudon, so I just figure, okay, let's just throw my Melmetal away. I've got 2 Pokemon on my opponent's team that are weak to Palkia, so I can get a pretty big advantage here. When they bring in their Dialga, I actually just go right for the Draco Meteor because I figure they're not expecting it. So they definitely were not expecting it. We kill their Dialga, and then we are able to fire off an Aqua Jet over onto their Groudon. So now I'm just going to go into Mewtwo, eat this Earthquake, and eat this Fire Punch as well. We are going to be saving all of our shields for Palkia, and now Palkia should be able to pretty easily clean up this battle. I can just shield. I know they're Fire Punches from Groudon. I know that they are not a huge deal, but I think that that's all that my opponent's going to be doing. So we take out their Groudon, and then we take out their Dialga, and we still have a shield left to show for it. We're going to look at one more battle with Palkia as a winning leading matchup. This one's going to play out a little bit differently, though. This time, our opponent's Groudon is going to switch into Melmetal, and that's pretty good for my opponent here against my team. I don't want to switch into my own Melmetal, which I said I kind of of like to try to do where I can, because I don't want my opponent's Melmetal to have an energy advantage over mine. So I just go into Mewtwo, and I'm fine just kind of throwing away my Mewtwo here. But when I go for this Shadow Ball, my opponent actually beats me to the charge move, so I basically have to shield this here. Just have way too much energy on my Mewtwo to just let it go. So then I throw off a few more Psycho Cuts before Shadow Balling down my opponent's Melmetal, and now we've lost a shield, but we have regained the switch advantage that my opponent kind of put us in an awkward position with that Melmetal. Now I can bring in Melmetal against their Dialga, and when they switch into Groudon, I'm ready to switch back over into Palkia, and no harm, no foul. So now it doesn't really, like, at this point shields don't really matter. Palkia is just so good against Groudon, and I will shield this Earthquake here, but Palkia is just so good against Groudon, and especially Melmetal is just so good against Dialga that I can afford to waste a shield to kind of win that opening matchup there with Mewtwo up against Melmetal. Our Palkia is going to die to the Groudon's second Earthquake there, but then we'll be able to take out the Groudon pretty easily, and then I build up enough energy to double superpower my opponent's Dialga, and actually just one superpower takes it down even. So those games more or less showcase when everything goes right. Most teams are going to be playing a Dialga. That's not really like a meta read that you have to be too concerned with, but part of the reason that this is a anti-meta team is I think that the leads that I just showcased are pretty common leads right now. Now, there are some other leads that you will face up against, and that's when you have to go into phase 2 with this team, or strategy 2, or whatever I called it before, but that is utilizing Mewtwo as a safe switch. So we're going to go ahead and look at some of those games right now. In this first game, our Palkia is up against a Togekiss, so I'm going to go ahead and immediately switch over into Mewtwo, and this is going to do a few different things, but notably, your opponent is now inclined to switch into the Pokemon that I just showcased, and Kyogre is a really common switch on these Togekiss teams, and Mewtwo beats Kyogre. So I'm actually going to lose this matchup though, just because I want to get in some energy on my Palkia, but I'm up a shield now. So I have let my opponent use a shield to maintain switch advantage here, but I am thinking that my Melmetal is going to be pretty good against their team. Their last Pokemon, chances are it's a Dialga, especially when we haven't seen them use a... that Togekiss actually does have a best buddy ribbon on it, but their last Pokemon is probably Dialga, and the fact that my opponent hasn't switched definitely means their last Pokemon is Dialga as they switch into it here now. So I'm going to go ahead and fire 2 superpowers off on this Dialga, and then that should be enough to bring my switch timer back up, and then I will be able to switch over into Palkia just to remove the debuff on my Melmetal, but I don't even need it. You can see I can just Aqua Tail this Togekiss, and that is dead, and I win with a shield in a losing matchup. So that's how powerful this team is, just as an anti-meta team. The team that I just played against is basically the exact team that this team destroys, and it's a very common team here. Another really common team composition where Palkia has a losing lead matchup is up against Dialga. So against a Dialga, we are going to immediately switch over into Mewtwo, which more often than not is going to prompt a switch into Giratina Origin Form. Giratina lines up poorly against Palkia and great against Mewtwo, so it makes a lot of sense for opponents to switch into it here. We're going to try to go for a zero shield scenario, and our opponent is going to not shield this Psystrike here. So now we actually reclaim the switch advantage. My opponent brings in Dialga, and we bring in Melmetal. well. So once this switch timer comes up, my opponent is probably going to switch here. They also just used a Draco Meteor, so they are able to catch our superpower on their Kyogre, but now I get to switch into Palkia, and I will just be able to Dragon Breath farm this Kyogre down. I don't really have to care about these surfs from Kyogre at all. We are just going to go straight Dragon Breath, and they are going to get off one more surf right before we kill them. But these surfs are doubly resisted, I think, like I said earlier in the video, so it doesn't really matter. I could have baited here with an Aqua Tail, but I just went right for the Draco Meteor, thinking that they would think it was a bait, but people aren't, they weren't sure how much energy I had. They figured I would just be going for a Draco Meteor, so maybe you do want to bait in that scenario. Then we go back into Melmetal though, and we are Melmetal with a shield. Despite having almost no HP, we are going to be able to just double superpower down this Dialga and take it out before we die. So there we go, defeating Dialga while losing the lead. We can eventually line our Dialga, or line their Dialga up against our Melmetal, and there we go, there's a 5-0 with this team. I'm going to showcase another battle here with the same kind of start to it. So I'm going to safe switch over into Mewtwo. That is going to prompt a switch into Giratina Origin form for my opponent, and I will just be double Psystriking my opponent, but this time they are going to be shielding us, so I am just going to let their Giratina kill me and fire off 2 Psystrikes on my opponent's Giratina Origin form. So from this point, I'm going back into Palkia, and I am just going to farm this Giratina down. I'm not going to shield the Giratina, and I'm going to try to win this match with my shield advantage. So if my opponent's last 2 Pokemon were Kyogre and Dialga like they were in the last matchup, this would have worked out super well for us. However, they do have a Togekiss, so I'm going to switch into my Melmetal and just build up some energy on Melmetal. After they fire off their Iron Head on my boy here, we are going to go for some superpowers and start trying to take out this Dialga. I just go for superpowers. I don't really care about the debuff on Melmetal. I just care about the fact that this is our cheapest charge move, and like you can see there, the fact that they shielded one of them and then I was still able to get to another superpower is pretty gravy. Then I switch over back into Dialga to remove the huge debuff that is now on my Melmetal. I let Togekiss farm me down there, and then I am just barely able to get to a Rock Slide, and while that match was pretty close, I think it's also pretty impressive that I won that with a losing matchup with 2 shields at the end of it. That team that my opponent just showcased, this Dialga Giratina Togekiss team, is a super common meta team that I think this team does really well against. That game, I think, also transitions well into the team's third principle, which is just that Melmetal is super strong. So first off, we'll try to win the lead with Palkia, and then we will switch to Mewtwo as a safe switch option, but when in doubt, Melmetal can sometimes pull it out. So in this game, we are going to fire off a Shadow Ball with our Mewtwo here, and they actually bring in a Zekrom, which is pretty scary. I'm going to bring in Palkia, and I'm going to try to farm this Zekrom down, but they are able to get to a Wild Charge before I am able to kill them, so I'm going to let my Palkia die as well. Melmetal's going to be able to build a little bit of energy here, and I'm just going to hope that Melmetal plus 2 shields is good against their last 2 Pokemon. This basically, their last Pokemon need to be Melmetal and Togekiss, or one of those 2 plus Dialga. But this works out pretty okay. So we're going to shield basically whatever this was here, but it is a Thunder, so I'm happy to spend a little bit of my opponent's energy, and I'm just going for Rock Slides. I don't have a Pokemon to remove the debuff for my Melmetal, so I just keep going for Rock Slides, and then they eventually bring in their other Pokemon, and it's Togekiss. So now we're just able to double Rock Slide this Togekiss. We're going to be able to take this out pretty easily. They do actually go ahead and shield on the Togekiss here, so that means they are going to try to use a move to take us out here. So we're going to go ahead, shield their ancient power, and then I build up to enough energy that I can rock slide this Togekiss and then immediately superpower my opponent's Dialga when that comes back in. So when in doubt, Melmetal can pull it out, and there you go. There is the third principle of this team in action. We're going to look at some other games here now where Melmetal kind of shines to round out this video. And I forgot about this one. We actually have a Palkia lead. So we are just going to be going straight Dragon Breath. And even though I have a Hundo Palkia, my opponent's suboptimal Palkia wins that Ditto mirror lead there. So they're able to get a Draco Meteor off onto my Melmetal. But my Melmetal now has an energy advantage against their Melmetal. So this is actually a pretty decent spot to be in. I am going to go ahead and shield their Rock Slides just because a superpower will kill me from here. But then I'm going to fire off some superpowers on them. And the second one is probably going to get a shield from my opponent, and then I go ahead and switch into my Mewtwo. Now hopefully this can eat a superpower from them, but it actually gets a Rock Slide. So from here, my opponent then switches into their Dialga after getting a little bit more energy on their Melmetal. So I'm just going to try to deal as much damage as I can with this Mewtwo. Maybe try to get a shield, and I actually do get a shield there because I build up some extra energy. But now I can shield this, whatever it is, from my opponent's Dialga, and now I can just build up a bunch of energy on my Melmetal. I can superpower to take out their Dialga, and then when they bring their Melmetal in, I can superpower that as well, and Melmetal is just a super powerful Pokemon. So there you go, there's a pretty good example of Melmetal kind of carrying us here. That was a little bit of a weird game with the losing the Palkia leading matchup there, but one of the strengths of Melmetal is just the fact that it is good with extra energy. That's kind of what the definition of safe switch Pokemon are, based on PvPoke. This game we are going to be up against a Mewtwo, and same kind of thing. Why Mewtwo is such a great safe switch is I can't bring in my Mewtwo against their Mewtwo. So I decide to go into Melmetal here and eat their Psystrike, and then my opponent brings in Dialga. So this is a pretty interesting one for my opponent here, but I think it kind of lets us know that my opponent is probably sitting on Togekiss as their last Pokemon. I'm not sure that they really wanted to switch their Mewtwo out and into Dialga regardless, but it just shows the strength of a Melmetal in general now. We're going to be able to get all of my opponent's shields with this Melmetal, and then will I switch out? Yeah, I'm going to switch out to remove the debuff, just recognizing that Melmetal is probably going to be really strong against my opponent's team. So then they show us their Mewtwo, we're able to kill that, and then they bring in the Togekiss. So that is what their last Pokemon is, and I am glad that I have saved my Melmetal. Togekiss will eventually be able to take down Palkia, but they won't have that much energy left on their Togekiss, or built up on their Togekiss, I should say. So we will be able to beat them to a Rock Slide, and then Dialga comes in, and Dialga actually Iron Heads my Melmetal, but Dialga has no health left because it is battled against a Melmetal, so Mewtwo is able to come in and Psycho Cut it up. This is another tricky leading Pokemon. Giratina Altered Form. We really don't want to switch into Mewtwo against a Giratina. So when we are up against a Giratina Altered Form that can fire off these quick Dragon Claws like this, what we're going to want to do is switch into Melmetal and catch one of these Dragon Claws. So that's what we do here. We waste a little bit of my opponent's energy, and then my opponent doesn't switch. So this is kind of an even matchup from here. Melmetal up against a Giratina Altered Form. that's what this is, right? Yeah, altered form. Just getting my forms mixed up here. But what's important is the fact that my opponent doesn't switch. Can you guess their last two Pokemon? If they're not switching in the face of my Melmetal, when this Giratina would line up so well against my other Pokemon. Well, one of them is Dialga, so if you guessed Dialga, you get a point. And we are just going to fire off these superpowers here now on their Dialga, and then I'm going to switch out my Melmetal. The main reason for that is my Melmetal had so little health that I'm afraid that if I go for another superpower, I will actually lose my Melmetal to a Dragon Breath from the Dialga. So I just switch into Mewtwo from there, and then my opponent brings out their last Pokemon, which is a Melmetal of their own, and now we know why they couldn't bring in, they couldn't switch against my Melmetal, because my Melmetal would have had the energy lead. So that's also why Melmetal is a pretty good switch. It beats itself, but Melmetal is just a super strong Pokemon. We're going to bring out Palkia now, and we will have to shield my opponent's Rock Slide on their Melmetal. And then I'm going to be able to Aqua Tail their Melmetal down. And then when they bring in their Dialga, I just throw an Aqua Tail, but then I switch into Melmetal and I go ahead and finish it off with that superpower that I used. I just used the Aqua Tail just to buy me some time to make sure that I could cleanly switch into the Melmetal. But there you go, Melmetal showing his strength against a Dialga. I've got one last battle to showcase for this video. It is up against a Togekiss lead, so we are going to switch into Mewtwo, and this time my opponent actually switches into a Dialga, which is a pretty decent play from their perspective, depending on what their last Pokemon is, but Dialga is going to be able to take down Mewtwo and maintain my opponent's switch advantage in this matchup. We are going to be able to get one of Dialga's shields, though, so that is pretty nice, so we are losing... We're keeping shield advantage, losing switch advantage. We bring in Palkia to take their Dialga out, and then they're going to bring in Togekiss. We're going to fire off an Aqua Tail on that Togekiss before switching into Melmetal. Now, my opponent's last Pokemon is Kyogre. This isn't the worst case scenario in the world, but it can definitely be a little bit tricky here. Basically, we're going to shield anything on Melmetal. I think Melmetal has a better chance of taking out Kyogre than my Palkia does at taking out my opponent's Togekiss. So we're going to shield all the surfs that happen on our Melmetal here. And then I'm going to go for a superpower as my last move, because then I can switch out over into Palkia, and I actually get to catch their last Surf as well, which is pretty sweet. Then my opponent switches into Togekiss, and they immediately take down Palkia, so that's exactly what I was talking about. We are going to shield their Flamethrower here, and then we are going to fire off a Rock Slide on their Togekiss, and then we are actually going to tie. So this was a pretty funny game, but I thought it was a sweet enough game that I wanted to end on it. I could have just thrown probably one less fast move on my opponent's Togekiss there at the end before using the Rock Slide. Maybe that would have done it, but also my team doesn't have any best buddied Pokemon. So all of these games, I wasn't using a best buddy, and I think that just shows that this team can only go up from here. We would have won that Palkia lead matchup if I was using Palkia best buddy, and any of these Pokemon could honestly be best buddied. You'd probably go for Palkia just to win the lead, even though I still wound up winning that game. But yeah, I just, if any of my Pokemon were best buddied in that last game, we definitely would have been able to win it. But I definitely think that this team is a sweet team. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. One thing that I will say, it's an anti-meta team. So part of the benefit of that is not running Dialga. But that doesn't feel totally fair to say if you're looking for a team that doesn't have Dialga in it, and then I'm like, okay, well then just play Palkia, another equally rare Pokemon that was out for a similar amount of time a long time ago. So you probably don't have Palkia either if you don't have Dialga. One thing that can work with this team is Dragonite as a leading Pokemon. Dragonite has a few advantages over Palkia, actually, in that it's good against Zekrom and Reshiram as well. The main trade-offs for Dragonite is that you are not going to be as good against things like Rhyperior, Groudon, and Kyogre, but you are going to be better against things like Giratina Altered Form, Giratina Origin Form, and you even have decent game against something like Dialga as well. So I definitely think Dragonite plus Mewtwo and Melmetal safe switch options can be played in the Master League as well, but I wanted to try out Palkia, mostly because I think Palkia has some really polarizing leading matchups that you either just crush them completely, or if they're bad, you've got Mewtwo as an excellent safe switch option. So hopefully this gives you an idea of how to play this team, and even if you can't play it yourself, hopefully you enjoyed the battles and enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more in the future. You can also comment down below to let me know what you want to see in the future. But that's going to be it for me, guys, for this video. Thank you very much for watching. I'm NoLucksGiven. Peace!